So I'd like to formally welcome everybody to today's webinar, which is how to develop active listening in the contact center. As you may have heard, we've already been speaking a bit about this in our intro, but now it's time to introduce today's speakers once more. This is first presenter is Carolyn Blunt, who is the MD at Ember Real Results. Do you want to tell us a bit about what Ember Real Results do, Carolyn?
Sure, I've got a slide actually later which might explain it a bit better. So just very quickly, in a nutshell, I lead the learning and development part of the Ember Group. So we are specialists in learning and development solutions for customer contact operations and environments. So whether that's contact centres, but also maybe out into your field teams and things like that, but particularly in the soft skills of how we speak to customers.
Yeah, and I was actually at an Ember event recently, which was how to encourage sales through service, and I learned a lot. So I think I definitely encourage other people to maybe have a look at those after today's webinar, perhaps. We also have Niels S. Richthoff, who works as product manager at Enchhouse Interactive. Do you want to tell us a bit about what you do there, Niels?
Yeah, sure. Enchhouse Interactive is a software company. We are doing a range of products for the contact centers, anything from omni-channel contact centers over quality management, workforce management, outbound solution, IVRs, what have you. We'll probably have a product for it.
Yeah, I think that's today's webinar is going to work nicely with Carolyn talking from more human element, but then Neil's coming in with the also very important technology angle and how these tools can help to develop active listening in the call center. Just a couple of things before we get started with the presentation. You can watch the webinar, the replay and the slides later today. It will all be recorded, so if you hear a nice bit of information in the presentations and you want to refer back to it later, please make sure you check out www.callcenterhelper.com/recorded-webinars, and they'll all be available for you this afternoon. Other things as well, you can log into our chat room, which is www.callcenterhelper.com/chat, and that will also be a great place for you to download today's slides and download the chat log, which will be a great place for everyone to share best practices, send in the tips and questions to us also, and then they can help get answers, and you can help get answers to them from our panel of experts today. One great thing that we could do with the webinar and the chat room is put them side by side. So obviously you're watching the presentations and then you're taking the information and sharing your own thoughts on it, your own opinions, and sending in any questions that you might have, any thoughts, and send them in. And after each presentation, we will go back to those and we'll share those with our experts, and they'll send in information that could be worth helping you. Also, we have a prize for the best hashtag question and hashtag tip that you send in. So the winner of that, which I'll announce at the end of the webinar, we will send either a box of chocolates or a box of champagne to the winner, which is a nice little touch. We have been asking the question in our chat room before this webinar started, in 1 or 2 words, how would you rate the listening skills in the contact center? We've had a number of responses already. We said Tom says that they are adequate/average. Jala says they're mixed, technical knowledge high, but plans in place. And Michael says we include listening and questioning skills during induction, and then top them up as required with the kit box exercises. Do you like that idea, Karen?
Yeah, absolutely. Follow-up is the most important thing, really. So 70 to 80% of what people learn in induction, they'll have forgotten 3 to 6 months later, if not sooner. So it's really key that that follow-up happens, and that needs to be a bit of digital self-driven learning or coaching or, practical exercises in huddles, and that's the kind of stuff that I'll be talking about today that we can do.
Yeah, I think I heard the fact myself that after 2 weeks, advisors have learned, I've forgotten about 70 to 80% of what they've learned in induction. So it's very important. Yeah. So it's very
the same with
important.
anything. Yeah, not just induction, this webinar. So, within 2 weeks, you were asking me, do I remember the first ever webinar that I did for call center helper? It was like, oh God. So yeah, we just forget stuff. So we can't hold on to it. So it's important to keep it really current and in front of their eyes if it's a priority. And very timely, as Neil said, making sure that feedback and coaching and stuff is timely.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a poll now to launch, which is, do advisors with lower handling times generally have better listening skills? So I'll launch that for everyone now. And the answers are yes, no, or it varies from advisor to advisor. What results are you expecting here, Niels?
I'm not sure. I would say probably yes, unless of course the listening gets into the way of the handling time. But I would say yes, because if you're not listening, then the customer will have to repeat what their problem is, and that's gonna extend the handling time.
Absolutely. So let's share these results with you now. And it looks very interesting. We have 23% say yes, 8% say no, and 69% says it varies from advisor to advisor. Does that surprise you at all, Carolyn?
Not at all, no. I think it varies. It depends on the call type, really. So as Neil said, if it's a straightforward call and I listen effectively, then I will have lower handling time, which is why 23% say yes. I would think that's where they're thinking. They don't have to say, sorry, what was your postcode again? Or, any of that. But if it is a complicated, complaint call or something like that, and they've got good listening skills, they are just going to listen, and that customer is going to vent, and that's going to take time, and it probably go over the average handle time kind of marker. So we've got to sort of think about the different call types as well, but either it varied or yes would be the sorts of answers I would expect mainly.
Excellent. And I think that leads us nicely into your presentation now. So I'm just going to pass the control over to you. Okay,
I'm just going to set my timer because I'm notoriously chatty when I get going. So I know I'm going to talk for sort of about 17 minutes thereabouts on active listening in the contact centre. So can you see my screen?
Yes, I'm just passing it over to you now.
Fantastic.
Sorry about the delay.
Hopefully you've got it now.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to talk about active listening in the contact centre. I say about 17 minutes, something like that. I'll do my best to fit into the timescale. So I've been doing this in terms of soft skills and people development in contact centres for more than 15 years now. I absolutely love it because I get to go into lots of different operations and really get under the skin of kind of the types of calls and customer profiles, the demographic of their advisor population, and really kind of understand what makes good conversation management. And it's really interesting because especially when we think about listening skills, it's as much about listening to what's not said as well as what's definitely there in front of you. So it's absolutely fascinating, and no two projects are the same. So we do projects in customer service, sales through service, as you mentioned, Charlie, and lots of work with kind of team leaders around coaching skills, and ideally where we can use the data from speech analytics to tie into that. It's like training needs analysis on steroids, which is wonderful in this day and age. And we do like to use technology through our L&D solutions, and this is a really important part of the follow-up piece for any listening skills learning intervention that you might do, or any induction program. So what we actually do and who we are as the Ember Group is there are three kind of component companies within it. So one is L&D, which is Real Results, the part that I lead. One is Ember Services, which is the UK's largest independent customer management consulting organisation. And then we have Mottram Search, which is a recruitment and headhunting operation for the customer management industry. So what we do is we seek to provide those services to organisations, not just in the UK, internationally as well, and really help people to do the right thing for their customers and drive value from their operations. So all of those different parts fit together really nicely. So I've had, I say, the opportunity to explore listening as a topic for a long time in a lot of different places. And what I really notice is people can think that they're doing listening, but that there's a big difference between listening and listening actively. So when we come to think about today's webinar, we really want to be thinking about how we do the active part of that, which takes more effort and concentration, and I'll touch on ways in which we can look at that. So if you've ever looked up what active listening is as a definition, it's a communication technique that's actually used in counselling. It's used in training and particularly in coaching one-to-one conversations. And especially important, I think, for the contact centre is the conflict resolution part, because it requires that the listener fully concentrates and understands and responds rather than reacting, which is a really key part, and then that they remember what is being said. So there's a difference between hearing something and reacting versus hearing something, interpreting it, evaluating it, and then responding to that. And that's the bit, I think, that sometimes when people are busy, they get complacent, they've been doing it a long time, they're tired, they're bored, whatever it might be, they might be disengaged because they might find the customer's got their back up and they feel a bit rude. That middle bit of the interpreting and evaluating is gone. So this is something that actually, when we look at it as a topic, people say is really relevant to them in their personal lives as well as their work lives. It's something that I think we can all be guilty of not listening properly to our family members. Particularly my husband is guilty of not listening to me properly at times, I would say. And I think this was one of the first times I realised how important that interpretation and evaluation part was quite early on in our marriage, sort of, probably about 18 years ago now. We were child free, and I said to him, can we go out for dinner tonight, darling? And he was watching football at the time in the living room, and he didn't take his eyes off the screen, and he just sort of went, yeah. I think just to make me go away, make that interruption go away. And I was really pleased because it meant I didn't have to cook and I could go and get dressed up. And I came back about 3 hours later, probably, as take a long time to get ready, and went in the living room and said, right, are you ready then? And he said, what? Why? What are we doing? Where are we going? And had absolutely no recollection of that conversation at all. And I'm saying, you said we were going out for dinner. Did I? I don't remember that. When was that? And that's just typical of when it's just an automated reaction and not a thoughtful and considered response. And so what we'll see here is that advisors will jump to conclusions. They've heard it all before, and they'll cut customers off, or they'll just be thinking about other stuff and then give the answer they were going to give anyway, as soon as they get to pause for breath, So this is where we really need to get them to stop and calm and sort of step back and really think about the active part of listening skills. And when we do that and we step back, we can look at our operation and say, what does it look like to listen actively in a contact centre environment? And what that actually then means is that we get to see the customer talk time versus the advisor talk time, and see what the balance is. So are the advisors talking more than they're listening, for example? I want to see actual physical note taking. I know I'm a bit Generation X and old fashioned, but when people write stuff down, it helps that interpretation and evaluation. And if you want to do it paperless and digital or whatever, then and use Microsoft Note or whatever, that's fine. But somewhere to kind of process in rough that isn't in the call notes, actually that needs to be good quality stuff, and you might need to edit and strip it out and condense it rather than just fill it with a whole load of ramble. But just that process of going through those notes is helpful. I will see people doing this, which for those of you who don't have a webcam, you wouldn't have been able to see, but it's silent nodding. So this is, something that is good because it means they're listening and they're processing, but if you can't see me, you don't know that I'm doing anything. So actually what we want to do is encourage them to take the next step, which is to verbalize those nods with yeah, okay, and just to provide that encouragement and avoid that silence. The other thing we'll see is people summarizing back, so actually interpreting and evaluating and giving back their version of, so I think what you're saying is, or if I've understood correctly, the situation is, and those are the sorts of stuff, if you use interaction analytics, you can start to look for. And then we would also be wanting them to be asking lots of clarifying questions. So actually we take the information that the customer's given, and then we drill down with what we call spotlight questions, which are really things that you can't script. You can't really train them through as set phrases, but they would be relevant to what was said before. And, you know, so it'd be things like, say it's an insurance and it's a home claim or something. It would be, so you're saying that the water damage is limited to the kitchen floor, is that correct? You know, so those sorts of things that really pick up on the information and drill down. The other thing we would see are things like using the knowledge base, so that they're proactively thinking about something that they've had on a call or email or chat, whatever, but they go into the knowledge base and say, I couldn't answer that, or I couldn't answer it quickly enough, or I had to ask for help. So what's the gap in my knowledge that I need to close for next time? So that's really, really positive as a culture when we see that happening, particularly in the white space where they're quiet between calls. And then finally thinking about effective two-way coaching conversations, because active listening needs to start at the top of the organisation. It needs to be role modelled all the way through, and team leaders need to be having effective coaching conversations where they're really listening, but also that the advisor is coming to those coaching conversations saying, I really want to work on this, and that they're really sort of consciously processing where the gaps were perhaps in their conversations that they've had with customers that they want to close. So when things fail, what does that look like? So what does active listening not look like in a contact centre? And this, again, you know, I've been one to sort of discuss AHT at length, and multitasking is one of the things that actually detracts from listening. So as I was saying, my husband was watching football, then he was not listening to me. And quite often contact centre operations have multiple systems, you know, wall boards, comms on screens, you know, colleagues asking if people want a cup of tea, you know, all sorts of distractions. The sandwich van's arrived and it's all going on. So that whole multitasking thing, sometimes it is more haste, less speed. So that's something to watch out for. Distractions can again be really kind of interrupting that whole listening process. Noisy backgrounds, that's one of the things that just the construct of open plan floors makes it quite difficult at times. So we can certainly think about noise cancelling headsets and that sort of stuff to benefit the customer, but what can we do for the advisor? So headsets themselves that are not great, are single earpiece, old, you know, that kind of stuff can be quite detrimental. I'm a big fan of wireless headsets, so if the person next to me is really distracting me and noisy, I can get up and I can move away to talk to the customer. And we touched on metrics earlier when we talked about kind of thinking about AHT, and if I am being really punished on talk time, then I may find that I speed up the process, and that means that I skip through things and I don't listen properly and I rush the customer away. So we've got to be careful that the metrics that we're using are driving the right behaviours. So particularly things like first contact resolution is great to drive really good listening skills, because we want to encourage people to make sure that customer's not going to contact again. Poor resourcing, and that doesn't just mean kind of, you know, fire your planner or anything, but it is that kind of, you know, we have got less people than we need for whatever reason, you know, whether it's shrinkage and sickness, or whether it's because marketing sent out a campaign and nobody told the contact centre and suddenly volumes have gone mad, or the weather was unpredictable and it's caused that. But when I'm under that pressure as an advisor and there's a massive queue, that's when again my listening can potentially not be as good, which leads to those, you know, we have those unexpected spikes and people start to panic, and that becomes a bit of a worry. So the question I think you asked me earlier, Charlie, was can people improve their listening skills easily or not in the contact centre? And I would say they can. I think we can train this through. And I'm going to give 5 tips here as to what we could potentially think about. And tip number 1 is to beware solution-focused thinking. So solution-focused thinking is a process where we encourage our advisors to think about the resolution, because customers generally don't wake up saying, I want to phone a call centre or I want to send an email. They've got a problem and it needs to be solved. Now, your experienced advisors will be, yeah, I've seen this all before, and they'll jump into a particular path of resolution, and that might not be the right path. And so active listening means we stop, we check, we think more openly, and actually for this particular scenario, it might be a step in a different direction that we need to take. Tip number 2 is speed is the enemy of good listening. And we talked about kind of the whole thing around spikes and volumes and AHT targets and that kind of stuff that can put pressure on people. But some people are just naturally wanting to, get through their work, and it's encouraging them to slow down, to breathe, to think about putting that focus on the other person. So as team leaders and managers, we need to really make sure we are facilitating that. And I know that, the customer's always going to come first. So it's hard when you've got people in a queue not to kind of put people under some of that pressure. But again, it's a bit hare and tortoise. And, if you rush through things, people are just going to call back. Tip 3 is, are you a secret narcissist? And so my question really to advisors when I touch on this is to ask them to think about who is the most important person in this conversation. Just because of the nature of what contact centres are about, we tend to attract people to work in them who are quite chatty and extroverted and bubbly, which is great. You need that energy through your voice all day. But if you really like the sound of your own voice too much, then it can get in the way of your ability to zip it and to listen to the customer. So I kind of really get them to think about, yes, you might be really knowledgeable, but let's just use a bit more pull communication strategy, which is to ask questions, rather than push, which is to bombard them with information, whether they've asked for it or not, just because you know it and you like to talk. So that's one to watch for. And then this one, which is I call What Am I Having for Tea? And this is a kind of like little journey that people go off in their minds thinking about other stuff, because we've all got other stuff, and it's like, oh, I hope my dog's okay, and I wonder if my boiler will be repaired by the time I get home, or my car's due for its MOT, I must remember to book that in. Oh gosh, what did you say again? And so it's how you silence that chatter in your head. And so one of the strategies for this that I always encourage advisors to do is to have almost like a park pad. And they can put notes in their phone or whatever and put it in their locker, and then come back to it at the end of the day. And it's kind of quite a cathartic thing to sort of empty the mind and silence that. And then final tip here is practice makes perfect. So this is to think about playing listening games in every huddle you have, every team meeting you have, even if it's sort of a quick 30-second quiz question, or if it's an actual activity, but to kind of keep listening at the fore of what we do. And somebody mentioned in the chat room about having a kit box. So it really is about building up your repertoire of activities and stuff like that you can use. And to help you with that, I do have an option if you want to send an email to us, info@emberrealresults.com. We'll send you 3 listening activities for free on a PDF just to get you started or to add to your collection.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Carolyn. Numerous great points in there. I particularly liked avoiding silences to build rapport through verbal nods, which is great. And then summarizing the call back to the customer, I think it's very important to help them realize that you've acknowledged, and then add in the reassurance. And then also, I particularly liked the metrics point. Are you driving the right behaviors through your choices of metrics? Which leads us nicely onto our next poll, which is which metrics do good listening skills help to improve. I will just load that up for everyone to see now. And there we go. What results? I know you mentioned first contact resolution in your presentation earlier, Carolyn, but what results are you expecting to see here?
Yeah, I might bias that a little bit, I think, but certainly it does help with that, 100%, no doubt. And customer satisfaction, I think, is also one, and it should potentially improve the quality scores if we've got the right, if we're looking for the right things in our quality framework, which is another bone of contention sometimes I get on my high horse about, because if you've got things that are mandatory in your quality framework, like, is there anything else I can help you with, and you couldn't help them with what they wanted in the first place, it feels like you're not listening. So be a bit, just have a caveat on quality.
Excellent. And just put the results through now, and it seems like the audience agree with you. We have 86% for say first contact resolution, 90% say customer satisfaction, 46% say customer effort, 32% say average handling time, which surprises me that it's that low, and 68% say quality scores. Any surprises in there for you, Niels?
No, that's exactly what I would have said. Customer satisfaction, quality scores, I think is the main tool here.
Excellent. And that leads us nicely into our chat room. So I know it's been very busy. I see there are lots of people in there today. And let's get on to your opinions, tips and questions and see what our experts think. So our first opinion comes in from Kristen, who says, we have a one-day training on excellent customer service that includes active listening exercises, no follow-ups afterwards. So what do you think about that, Karen?
Very common, and we can certainly help you with that. So if Kristen wants to drop me an email, I'm more than happy to give her some further thoughts on that. But you've got to follow up. You absolutely have to follow up. So whether it's a face-to-face game, quiz, something like that, or if you want to use our Errol Owl type platform, which is a digital quiz question through their email every day, and you can put a bit of audio clip and then say, what did the customer say, this or this, then that kind of stuff's really kind of creative and modern way of doing it.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the point in the chat room earlier as well about having that kit box ready and raring to go. We now have an opinion sent in from Jarlath, who says turnover rates impact heavily on listening skills, as there's inevitably a push towards product knowledge, and softer skills can get missed without good, consistent peer-to-peer and other live call coaching support. Would you go along with that, Niels?
Yes, yeah. Turnover is a big problem in any call center environment. So to have the tools in place to get new agents up to speed faster is really making a difference. And I absolutely agree with Jarlath. It should not just be the product knowledge. It's important to say the right things, but it's also important the way you say them, and those soft skills need to be developed continuously, and tools should help with that.
Yeah, I think it's great to have a combination of both the human and the technology aspect. Now we have one question sent in by Louise Ann, who asks, how often should telephone soft skills be revisited for telephone agents? What do you think, Karen?
Well, like I say, with a digital platform, there's no reason why you can't do it daily. But I think realistically, in terms of if you're talking traditional revisiting of soft skills in a classroom type environment, then probably every 3 to 6 months, I would want to be making sure they've got a full day off the phones to come back and actually listen to calls at random and discuss and practice and reevaluate and look at what we're scoring for in quality, and should be really open and transparent with all that. So I would tend to at least do in their first year of employment, after induction, they would then have quarterly kind of follow-ups until at the end of that first year they'd do an advanced comms and kind of graduate from that. And then you want to make them kind of peer-to-peer sponsors of other new starters.
I also think with when it comes to forecasts, maybe if you've got low expected call volumes for number of staff, maybe that's a great opportunity to build the e-learning activities in also that you spoke about earlier.
And unfortunately, that is one of the things that gets moved quite a lot. So people often build in like an hour a week for people to do online and self-directed learning, but the take up in reality needs to be driven through more.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we have an opinion sent in from Sarah who says, we revisit soft skills regularly and use a customer service qualification that requires demonstration of listening and communication skills for identifying customer needs, assess expectations, etc. Does that all sound good to you, Niels?
Yeah, that sounds great. We need more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a tip now sent in from Tom, who says agent support can be improved through ongoing conversation, having coaching sessions that focus on that topic to help the agent remember and recall what they're learning. I think that's a nice little tip to have in there. And we also have another one sent in from Stuart that says it can't be assumed that the customer will actively listen. It is the advisor's responsibility to stimulate the customer to listen by using their name conversationally, ask questions, clarify understanding, recapping, etc. That all sounds good, doesn't it, Karen?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Another one sent in now from Seema, who says, we ask all advisors to close the call with, is there anything else I can help you with? This ensures nothing has been missed. I don't know if either of you have any actually closing phrases that you like, or do you think it's just better for the advisors to close naturally?
I have a whole slide on this, which is signposting, right? So signposting at the end of the call to let the customer know that the call is coming to a close is great, right? So it's like, you know, thanks, Charlie. It's been really great talking to you today. You know that the call's coming to an end, which if you're a quite chatty caller is really important. And that's what is there anything else I can help you with really is designed to do, because the answer that the advisor wants by the point they ask it at the close is, no, thank you, everything's been great. Because if they ask it at the end of the call and the customer goes, yeah, actually, could we also put my daughter on that quote? We've got to then kind of go back and kind of do it all again, and it can be almost nigh on impossible in some operations. So a few caveats with this. It depends on your operation. It depends on, do you really mean it to gather information, or are you genuinely using it as a signpost? And then the third thing is the thing I said at the end of my talk, which was, if you have that as a mandatory statement in your quality frameworks, be very careful, because if you haven't been able to do what I've asked, because I've asked for a full refund for the last 20 years, which is unreasonable, and then you go, but is there anything else I can help you with? It's awful. It's just going to cause more conflict. So just those are the things I would say just to be a bit careful about with that one.
Yeah, it's just the issue of saying, oh, have a nice day, which could sound sarcastic as well. If maybe it's not been a great interaction with the customer. It just might seem sarcastic or give the wrong vibe as well. And one final question from Michael, who says, what's the best way to improve active listening via speech analytics? I know you're going to get onto this, Niels, but is there a quick explanation you can give?
Yes. Make sure it's real time. It's no good to cover the well after the baby dropped into it. So if the agents, and that's what I'm going to cover in a minute, is getting visual feedback while they're talking, we can always nudge them back on the right path, and with that instantaneously make things better for customers. And that's better than somebody coming around and knocking on your shoulder and saying, well, you've done it wrong again, Michael, you really need to think about this and this. It's better to have that instantaneous feedback from on the screen.
Absolutely, and I think that leads nicely into your presentation now. So if I pass the so-called baton over to you, and I'll let you get into it.
Right, fantastic. Thanks very much. I hope everybody can see my screen. I will now take over and speak about the tools as in the software tools that you can use to develop active listening. So there are mainly three approaches to measure and change agent behavior. There's the historical one, where you sort of look at a past period, the last month or the last week or something. And that's great to build trend analysis for things like research and or even workforce scheduling. Post-event is still historical, but sort of closer to the event right afterwards, or within an hour. And that's good to identify training needs and impacts. But really, as I just said as the answer to the last question, where the music plays is in real time. Monitor what's going on in real time across all the agents, all the calls, so not just have a sample, but cover everything and give visual feedback to the agent if things go wrong. And indeed, as long as things go right, because we all like a pat on our back, don't we? And that is really the approach you should be doing, because it helps to ensure compliance and to coach your staff, or even steer them through the call based on what the software is hearing from the customer. So why is this important? Treating customers fairly is one of these buzzwords that's been around in the call center for a long time now in the industry. I think we need to get it off the wall posters, off the motivational posters onto the screen and in the forefront of the agent. Emotions in calls play a big role. They are at least as important, if not more important, than the spoken word, because the agent might say all the right things and convey all the right information. If they are upsetting the customer somehow, or are being perceived as being rude, they're not going to be successful on the call. And the problem from my point of view is, even though emotions and so on, all of that plays a big role, there isn't really any objective measuring going on. If there's any measuring, it's always subjective, because it's other people checking on people, and QA people are usually not tasked to do that, and even if they were, it would be really difficult to do. So what's the way forward? To encourage active listening and agent empathy, agents should be supported during the call in real time and not reminded post-event. There are a number of indicators that we can use to sort of establish the atmosphere of the call. Carolyn mentioned some of them already. It's things like cross-talking, or the balance of speech ratio that helps with that, to establish an objective temperature, basically, of the atmosphere. And the last point, that's really crucial. Whatever call centers decide to do in order to encourage active listening, we can't afford to backslide on the more fundamental things, such as compliance or product knowledge. Whatever we do, we need to do it in a way that isn't to the cost of those things and removes the focus of them. So what's our solution here? We have a product called real-time speech analytics. What you see on the screen now, this slim panel is the live client, is the piece that gives the feedback to the agents. It typically sits on the right-hand side of the screen, and as the agent goes through a call and says things, on this checklist, things are being checked off. If any mistakes are being made, the software flashes red and puts a frowny face into the middle box, or wherever the box happens to be. And then right on the bottom, these green bars, they are what we call the soft evaluators, and they actually measure things like the speaking rate, is the agent speaking too fast or slow, or anything, and you can choose to show that to the agent or have pop-ups if they're getting it wrong. Of course, we don't just want to give feedback to the agent. All of this can be saved into databases, so there's a very extensive back-end reporting system that allows supervisors to identify training needs, see if trainings have worked, and actually how their teams are doing. And then to break it down to the individual tools. So the first thing I wanna mention is speaking rate. That's basically looking at how fast engine is speaking. By the way, all the things I'm showing here can be applied to either side of the call, either the agent or the customer. Certain things are not very useful to apply to the customer because we can't change their behavior, but it's very useful and important to measure them on the agent side. So speaking rate is one of those. Think of an agent reading our terms and conditions or something all day long. Inevitably, they will speed up throughout the day, even if they, want to do this slowly and so on. In the beginning, it's just human nature that we speed up, and eventually the customers don't actually have even the chance anymore to understand what we're saying. Speech ratio. That's sort of the Carolina referred to that earlier, is sort of the balance of who's talking and how much. So if I was measuring my speech ratio, I would get really poor results because I'm the only one doing the talking here. In a webinar, that's fine, or in a sales conversation, that might be okay too. But it's certainly not in a complaint or in a support situation. So depending on what kind of hotline or campaign we're talking about, the software can be configured to account for that and do the scoring accordingly. Volume, this seems a really low tech one, and it is, but it's no less important. I really get that very often when I talk to my bank or something, that I need to ask the agents to, do this. We adjust their headset microphone because, modern headsets have very targeted microphones, and if they're slightly off, then immediately the voice level, the volume level drops, and I find it hard to understand the agent. So if that happens, then we can give pop-ups to the agent, because it's better that the software tells them and they adjust before, than the customer needing to do that. Cost talking. This to me is really useful and important one. It measures how one person is interrupting the other one. If an agent interrupts the customer too often, that's perceived as being rude. Well, it is actually. So we wanna limit that and tell the agents to stop doing that if they start doing that during the call. Equally, if we find that customers are interrupting agents, that's a really useful insight as well, because it means that the agent isn't doing what the customer needs or wants. At this point, I like to use the example of my internet going down and me calling my internet provider, and then they're asking me to reboot my router and do all that. And I'm, Cisco certified, network, whatever, and already, done all these things or established that it's not that. And I will then interrupt the agent, sort of move their script along to the point where I actually get a chance of them helping me. Stress level, or better yet, the emotionality. This is sort of our rocket science element. And the purpose here is to establish the emotionality in the voices of the different speakers. For an agent, we want to be engaging. So we don't want them bored and devoid of information, emotion, but equally, we don't want them hyper. So with this technology, we can measure, how emotional the agents are, and if they are too emotional, then could be a range of things. Something happens in the breakout room or in the personal environment, and we might need to take the agent off and give them a hug or something to address that. Equally, it's good to monitor the stress level or the emotionality of customers. Think a complaint situation, and we have an agent here where we find that they're able to calm down the customer faster and better than others. Maybe it's something that we want to listen to the call recordings of in order to work out what this agent is doing and we can then train it to the other ones in order to lift the overall customer experience. And then lastly, pauses. Now, this is really important for active listening, obviously, and we can measure whether the agent is making pauses, but equally that they're not getting too long, because a pause of 45 seconds, that's not active listening, that's dead air, and that means that an agent is struggling to find the answer in their knowledge base system or something, and is leaving the customer alone, in the wilderness, and that's a problem. We can't have that. So just to sort of round this off, this is a quick screenshot of a call drilled into in the reporting system, and you can see lots of squiggly lines. I did this on purpose. Obviously, you can choose which ones you want to see to get a clearer picture, but I just wanted to show you that there is a wealth of information to be had, and it's not just one number per call. You can actually see the development throughout the time of the call, and you can relate that to what has been said, so you can see which specifically is that upset a customer, for instance, or achieve the opposite, and with that gain really useful insight. So coming up to the end now, just sort of my top tips to develop or to support development of active listening with tools. As I said, the goal is to achieve improvements without losing out elsewhere. It's no good to be really good at soft skills if we are actually telling the customers the wrong information. Support the agents with immediate feedback, something that's right in front of you, unobtrusive, but still in front of you, will help me and remind me much better than something that I'm told at the end of the day or the week even. Replace subjectiveness from agent evaluation. This again is really big. If you have people scoring other people, there's always an explicit there's sometimes an explicit and always an implicit bias. I like somebody and will always score them a little bit friendlier than others, or I just had a fight with somebody, and afterwards he or she can't do right anymore. This is a piece of software. It doesn't have a bad day. It doesn't have a personal opinion on somebody. It will either hear something or not. It will either detect stress or not. And lastly, and this is almost a commonplace statement or condescending, make sure that you have the right tools in place. I'm putting that on because it's always amazing how difficult it is actually to have the right tools in place. And the beauty is now that these exist. We are one of those who offer them, so avail yourself of the tools. And just as a thank you, we've got a nice video online that you can take a look at, and we're quite happy to, get in touch with you for demos or further discussions.
Excellent, thanks for that, Neil. I particularly liked the examples that you gave, the screenshots. I thought the traffic light systems to really highlight agent needs was a fantastic way of doing it. I also liked the fact that you could note through speech analytics. You could notice any interruptions, because I think that links in nicely with Carolyn's point about the secret narcissist in the call center, which I particularly liked. And also I liked the reference back to other very important call center soft skills such as empathy and taking ownership and that kind of thing. And we now head back to our tips and questions from the chat room. Again, it's been very active, so we'll just get onto those now. The first tip comes in from Claire, who says, when replying to a member via email or letter, type it, read it through, save it in your draft, and come back later with a clear head, and you can see something vital that you may have missed. Do you like this idea, Carolyn?
Yeah, I think that's great, as long as obviously you've got the ability not to have to send something back within a very tight SLA. But it certainly can also help with internal colleagues and things as well, sometimes just that emotion. And I think it just gets rid of any keyboard warrior tendencies as well.
Absolutely, controlling those contact center emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Our next tip comes in from Lenka, who says, I'm a big fan of self-reflection. Before I provide feedback on interactions, I encourage the agents to review their interactions first and consider what they thought went really well, how they made the customer feel, and what they could have done differently or better. Further, what good practice they could share with the rest of the team. Do you like this idea of sharing good practice with the rest of the team? And can technology do this well, Niels?
Yes, I'm really a fan of that one. The software screen that I showed earlier with the table and so on. I said that is for team leaders and so on. But that can be actually by login used in such a way that each agent can go into there and just see their own calls and how the scoring was, and then list to them themselves. So we can provide the tools to do just that. And I think that is a really good idea, because it possibly prevents me from the attempt to flight immediately or fight back just because somebody comes around and tells me what I need to do better. That's sort of something that's hardwired into us humans, isn't it?
I think especially the idea of customer fields. I know speech analytics can run sentiment analysis and things like that to really highlight, so as the interaction goes along, how the customer's feeling as well. We have a question now from Caroline, who says, do you take a different approach to coaching men and women with active listening skills? I too can relate to the husband example. Our sociology is different, that's all. What do you think about that, Karen?
I guess I have to be very careful what I say here, don't I? But there are
me.
books out there about Venus and Mars, right? So, and I think men are the first to say they find multitasking harder than women, probably. So, I don't personally take a different approach to coaching men versus women consciously. I think it's always about the individual, and every individual is different. So, kind of look at that individual as a person and their body language and eye contact and their style of communication and whether they're extroverted or introverted and all that stuff, probably more than gender. But yeah, I think there probably are some physiological differences as well, Caroline. I think I agree with you.
That was a difficult one to answer. Did well. We have a tip in now from Claire, who says, I always ask agents to try to feel how the customer is feeling, to help them hear what's really being said. I guess that's put yourself in the customer's shoes. And do you agree with that, Niels?
Yes, but again, it's really hard to do that, I think, because it's just one of the many things that they also have to do on the call. I think it's a good tip. It's the starting point, really. If they don't try to do that, then it doesn't matter that we give them feedback. They're just not going to heed it. So yeah, I think it's a good way of doing this.
Absolutely. Another tip in now from Sarah, who says, being able to tell the difference between needs and expectations is key. What is needed by the customer is not always what is expected by the customer. We need to encourage agents to use questions to draw out customer expectations and explore customer needs. What are your thoughts on this, Karen?
Yeah, I get where Sarah's coming from with that, because sometimes, the customer doesn't know all the different options that might be available to them, and they might be very set in their ways that they want it, how they've always had it before or whatever, and don't really want to try something different. So yeah, sometimes the agent needs to be able to question and uncover more to be able to really match the solution properly to that customer. So yeah, I would agree with that.
Absolutely.
It's a good one.
A question for Niels now. Can you detect also true, lie, ironic? So I guess, how can you detect customers' feelings and thoughts through speech analytics?
I don't know is the honest answer. It might be true. It might be possible to detect lies by looking at the emotionality. You know, if it's easy to say the truth. You know, you just say what you know, and that's it. It's hard and stressful to lie, especially lie well. You know, without wanting to slip into politics, you know, I think we can currently watch somebody who finds it easy to lie because he doesn't care whether or not he's found out. But if you want to lie in a way that you're not being found out immediately, it's really difficult. So it sets you under pressure. And I would expect the emotionality to go up. We don't have something that will sort of say, I think the customer's lying. But you know, indirectly, I think it can be approached. But I would warn against that, particularly to show that to an agent, because it will prejudice an agent and not be helpful in the conversation.
Absolutely, I think it's particularly difficult sometimes to, well, for anybody to tell it's truth or lie. So, yeah, absolutely. Our next tip is in from Stephanie, who says, in coaching, when reviewing a customer's call, ask your advisor what 3 things they know about their customer. What are your thoughts on this, Carolyn?
Yeah, that's a good one. Haven't come across that one before. So I guess it's what 3 things they know. So from a rapport building perspective, I guess it would be looking at what kind of free information that the customers kind of volunteered. So sometimes with you know, kind of life events, people might ring up and say, oh, I'm buying a dress for, you know, my best friend's wedding or whatever it might be. And so if you then have that coaching conversation, it's, you know, do you remember what this was? But again, a bit like, you know, we've already touched on, it has to be fairly soon in terms of being able to remember that. Because if I've talked to, you know, 30, 40, 50 people that day, you know, it's quite hard to remember that. So I guess you could play the call back and take it from there. But I'd kind of need to understand what Stephanie's approach is. But yeah, in principle, I think that could work quite nicely.
Yeah, it'd be great if you could detail more about that, Stephanie, by the way, in the chat room, and maybe we can come back to that in a minute. We've got another tip in now from Seema, who says, use real call examples to conduct role plays to highlight learning around active listening. What are your thoughts on this one, then?
Yeah, I think that's how you should do it. And the way to find these real call example is then obviously with a reporting tool, pick out good examples, pick out bad examples, and then sit down with the agent or the agents and, you know, and use the playback facility where you can see, you know, this is where the graph dropped or went up, and then you can play around that and use that to demonstrate, and then obviously move on to the role play to see what could have been done better in, you know, in this particular case or this particular situation.
What technology would you use to find the good and cool, good and bad? Cool
well,
examples?
My product, yeah. So you know, that's what I mean. It's yeah. You know, it has checked everything. It has analyzed everything. So you can just go in and basically say the search profile to find, you know, today I want to do a role play to, you know, improve X, Y, Z before I find the good examples and the bad examples. So rather than hunting around for them, you know, it's a 2-minute job to click the query together and pull out the 4 or 5 core recordings that you need in order to conduct the training.
Excellent. And now another opinion has come in from Louise Ann, who says, don't place too much emphasis on call handling time. Quality is always better than quantity. I know you have some thoughts on this, Karen.
Yes, I do, and I agree with Louise Ann on you know, the fact that each conversation needs to be looked at on its own merits from a quality perspective. But the data from call handling time can be really useful to look at those outliers and to understand, well, why was that so quick or why was that so long? And you know, absolutely, if you've got interaction analytics and you've got the ability to search for stuff You know, it's like having kind of call quality on steroids. But this, if you don't have that yet, in the meantime, you have to work with what data your basic cloud-based system might give you. Then handle time is potentially one of the things that you can use to select. Otherwise, you're just, you know, needle in a haystack. How do you choose at random from a whole list of call recordings which ones you're going to listen to?
Yeah. And the next tip in now is from Michael, who says, at the end of the call, recap to the customer what you've done, what they need to do, and what will happen next to ensure they're all clear. Do you think this is a good practice, Niels?
Yes, I do, as long as it's not too robotic. So I personally am not a big fan of, is there anything else I can do, when I, as the customer, made it clear at the outset that I'm calling about one specific problem, yeah, and that's being addressed. And everybody seems to use the same exact wording. So this is important, but you know, it should be a bit more personal or a bit more individual. Otherwise, I just know as a customer it's a box ticking exercise, and you know, it doesn't make me special. Doesn't make me feel special or something.
Yeah, I think it's great to have a bunch of different closing statements to refer back to and use in different situations. Absolutely. So a final tip now is coming from Michael, who says, train your agents to ask relevant questions so they get relevant answers. Is that a solid tip, Carolyn?
I think obviously you have to train people to ask relevant questions, but they need to understand what's relevant in what situation, and that's going to vary. So it's something that comes with knowledge and experience, and those are the two things that you have to make sure you're providing throughout your induction, but then also once they're live on the floor, and that you're able to adjust and affirm and provide examples where they're not getting it right as well.
Excellent, and that brings us to the end of the webinar for now, but just a few things before we go. In one or two words in the chat room, if you could please answer the question, what did you like best about today's webinar? And that'd be great, help us some feedback. And we do have a winning tip as well, so that chocolate and champagne that I mentioned earlier in the presentation will go to Graham, who sent in a tip saying, take an interest in the customer and ask a question out of curiosity rather than just the process questions. So congratulations for that, Graham. And again, if you complete the survey after the webinar closes, that would also help us improve webinars in the future. And one last thing is that you can also get a product demonstration of Engil's interactive software also by just filling in the survey and ticking in a box in the post-webinar survey. To watch the replay and to download the slides, to get access to any of the great information that was shared today, just visit www.consultanttohelper.com/recorded-webinars. The other webinars in our conference, so we have 2 left today. After a great day yesterday, and I hope a great morning this morning, is one at 1 o'clock, developing effective internal communications in the contact center, and one at 3 o'clock, 7 strategies to improve staff retention. So all that is left for me to say is thank you to Carolyn for her presentation today.
Thanks, Charlie. It's been lovely to be here. I'll jump in the chat room now for 5 minutes as well if there's any questions left to pick up.
Excellent. And thanks to Niels also.
Thanks, it's been a pleasure.
Excellent. And thank you everybody today. Bye.